In the last episode, we discussed the idea of the 4-day work week. We discussed the idea of competing incentives for engineers that are looking for a job. How do we compose our incentives in a way that are meaningful? In this episode with Ernie Miller, we're going to be talking more about the purpose and how the purpose of a company or the mission of a company can get translated to the people who are working there. My name is Jonathan Cottrell. You're listening to Developer Team. My goal on the show is to help driven developers like you find clarity, perspective, and purpose in their careers. If you missed the first part of this interview with Ernie Miller, I encourage you to go back to the last episode that released just 2 days ago and listen to that first. It'll likely give you much better context for what we're going to talk about today. Thanks so much for listening, and let's get straight into the interview with Ernie Miller. And it is surprising, when somebody's working in an area, it's surprising how complicated I as a manager or I as a content creator or whatever, I can imagine that people really want specific meaning, that they have some very honed in desire. They want to work in this specific arena. But I think a lot of times people are willing to work because there's some utilitarian value that we can't escape from our work for the average person.
Sure.
People want to work and then they want it to have meaning.
Absolutely.
And I don't necessarily think that it's so hard, like you're saying, to point them towards a meaning that is that you can attach to. It doesn't have to be something that they're deeply, people joining Monograph may not necessarily be, targeting deeply passionate about architecture or enabling that group of people. They want to work on a product that enables some group of people, right? And
Sure.
point them towards that. And you have this kind of moment of unlocking where it's previously I was doing tickets in order to make money, right?
Right.
Now
right.
I can see the effect of what I'm doing, and it doesn't really matter what that effect is as long as it's kind of a do no evil policy, probably for most people. They're willing to connect to a mission that isn't necessarily something that they would have come up with on their own.
Right. Absolutely. It's a matter of I am doing some good for some little corner of the world somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger the area, the more rewarding, certainly. But there are many ways to connect to the idea that I am doing something that is fundamentally improving things. It's why there are certain companies that I would never consider working at because I would not be able to connect to some idea that I am doing something good. And it's why when I talked to you in the past, I may have discussed in a less rigorous manner because I'm still kind of forming my thinking around this. The idea that values matter so much to me as a leader. Values are these, people like to joke about, especially with large companies, about company values being those things that people stick up on posters on the wall, and they're all very generic things like integrity. Well, of course, yes, we want to have integrity, but values. I had a pastor once that said, values are what come out when you get squeezed. Just like you don't squeeze an orange and expect lemon juice to come out of it. If you apply pressure to an individual, how they behave in that situation where there are actual challenges to be faced is where their values shine through, where you see what they're actually made of. And for me, being values aligned with the company has become sort of where I draw my power from, in a sense. Like my by power, I don't mean like authority, but rather my energy to go on, to be able to do the job each day. Because if you can say like we fundamentally align around a certain set of values, then when we say that, we can say, okay, so there is some sort of underlying truth or bedrock foundation, like an axiom on which anything that we're doing can probably be traced back to. And it's the same thing with a company's mission and sort of, but the mission and values piece of it is so incredibly important because specifically because of that. It is the thing that sort of feels like I can personally connect to and draw from to say, here's why we do this way. Because if I can't answer as a leader the why, if I have to resort to because I said so,
Yeah.
then
Oh.
which I mean, that is it was the least satisfying answer you ever got as a child, right? Was because I said so. And we're grown-ups are just large children. I mean, we still have that part of us. And it's a reasonable question to ask why, right? We have to do a thing. And if I can't answer that, well then I've got a problem as a leader, right? Maybe
Hmm.
I shouldn't be doing the thing, or maybe we shouldn't be doing the thing that I said just because I said so, right?
Yeah.
So like at Monograph, we have a people first value. We have a value of curiosity. We have a value around being intentional. We have one around doing the hard thing, one around having fun while we do it, and one around ownership. And these are values that you can actually take back to say, like, here's a practical look at how that looks when I operationalize that value.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's what I'm using as the basis for building the growth framework for the team. We didn't have a growth framework when I joined, and so I'm working on one. And in that growth framework, I'm tying anything, any axis that somebody's going to grow along to one of those six values, because I think that they're really good values, and they support a lot of great ways that an individual can grow in a way that's aligned with Monograph, and also with values that are worth having as an individual.
Yeah. This is uh this is particularly relevant, I think. Well, I guess so often companies at this stage, it is a very. I imagine if you're coming into a startup, you are ready to see. We have key values that the site that I guess displays the
Hmm.
values of the company, and people are orienting more around this idea. As a company grows, I think there's a tendency to kind of say, okay, we've got our values, we figured that out. Now let's do work, right? And I think there certainly is a tendency to disconnect, especially as the company gets large enough that you start getting in these cycles. I kind of think about it like offshoot cycles, right? I'm
Hmm.
thinking in my head, I'm just imagining like a weather system that has spawned another weather system, and the second one was started by the first one,
Hmm.
so in some ways connected, but nobody really knows quite exactly how that happens, right? And then it has moved out away from it, and it has its own ecosystem, and there's
Right.
its own kind of incentive system and all of this stuff that happens in isolation. And so much of the work that happens, especially as organizations grow, there's no clear line, no clear way to say this is you might be able to put it on like a label, right? You might be able to say, oh yes, the value that we have in that document over there, I'm going to slap it on to this effort and say
Right.
this is why we're doing it. But it's not generating that work, right? Or
Right.
it's not front and center when decisions are being made. And I think it so often is actually very practically helpful, even at the simplest level, um, to have ways that you apply these values. To your point, do the hard thing. I can imagine having this conversation in a product planning meeting with a team and saying, okay, we have this way X that is, it's going to put us in some technical debt or whatever the trade offs are, and saying, oh, we have this value of doing the hard thing. Which one of these things is better for the
Hmm.
company, even if it's
Hmm.
harder?
Hmm.
Choose that one, because this is how we make decisions, and using your values to create decision making frameworks rather than saying, here's something that we kind of ethereally believe
Right.
and we kind of rally around to feel good about our jobs, but operationally we don't really know how to practice it, right? Operationally,
Yes.
all we have is delivery as this kind of North Star.
Yeah, it's the those values are the things that sort of the rest sprouts from. And it's okay too, by the way, as a team grows, you're going to see smaller teams, and they're sort of they're sort of going to spring out of whatever you have originally and sort of adopt some of their own sort of supplemental values, and if as long as they don't conflict with the overarching sort of like the mission of the company and the values established by the company, that's to be expected. In fact, it goes back to being intentional, right? When you think about like the company culture, for instance, and I want to be careful because I don't want to conflate culture with values. I think they're subtly different, and it's worth calling that out.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about sort of the kinds of subcultures and subgroups that form within a company, they will develop a unique sort of fingerprint, that is all their own. You can either choose to allow that to just happen, or you can be intentional as a leader about how you're going to guide and sort of nurture the environment that creates the kind of culture that you want for that team. And I think that makes all the difference. But we don't want to ever sort of, or certainly from my perspective anyway, we don't want to sort of villainize the idea that these offshoots happen, but rather we want to own the fact that we can design for them and accommodate them in a way that doesn't conflict with the broader mission and values of the company.
We're going to take a quick break to talk about today's sponsor. Today's episode of Developer Tea is supported by Auth0. Identity is the front door of every user interaction. Login experience is critical to a user's experience with your app. And as a software engineer, you've probably spent countless hours on this incredibly important interaction. It's not just one interaction either. Login has gotten harder to do, and it's still not done. No matter how much time you seem to spend on it, seems like there's always something new to add, a problem to solve. And if you're like most teams, you don't want to spend all your time on the login. You'd rather focus on the core of your product. Maybe you don't have the expertise you need to make your login experience seamless, or maybe you are concerned about security or the constantly evolving nature of login that you can't keep up with. The build or buy decision on login is essentially a no-brainer, especially as you start to scale your application. Even better, if you can solve this before you adopt a bunch of technical debt or hidden security issues with a homegrown login solution. Auth0 is here to solve your login problems for good. They provide simple, secure, and adaptable login for applications and businesses, freeing you up to focus on the problems you are best suited to solve in your product. Auth0 supports virtually every style of login you could want. From social login to multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, passwordless, and much more. You can implement Auth0 in your application in as little as 5 minutes. Head over to auth0.com, that's AUTH0.com, to get started today. Thanks again to Auth0 for their support of Developer Tea. It is a very hard thing to do to keep values front and center. And it's also a hard thing to do to say, this is how it applies and how it doesn't apply. Mm-hmm. I mean, do the hard thing. Well, how do we decide what that means, right? In a given context? And there's probably heuristics and some kind of history. And to your point, you take culture in combination with values, and you could probably come up with a good answer. But I do think that maybe the most difficult thing that a company at scale faces is this ability to make decisions as a cohesive unit. Right? This we have some kind of goal, but where did the goal come from, and how do we achieve it? Right?
Yeah.
By what means? These are the decisions that split teams apart. And one person wants to do it one way, another person wants to do it another way. And very often things kind of settle at the lowest common denominator, right? And that's a really frustrating place to be, especially as kind of an individual contributor, because you have no idea really what your work is going towards. Versus in a healthy culture and in a company that practices those values more, like we've said so many times, at an operational level, you have more clarity around, here's why we're doing it this way. right? Here's why we are doing a 4-day work week specifically because of these things.
Right.
And if you can buy into these things, then the 4-day work week is kind of an output, right? It's
Yes.
it's not the input.
It's an expression of the value
Yes, exactly.
is exactly what, that's what, and I really do enjoy the term. And actually a former coworker of mine, Brett Watson, is the one that uh, familiarized me with the term operationalizing values. I had never thought about operationalizing values before, but put simply, that's put those values into practice. What does that actually, like, what does it look like in practice?
Right.
And that's the part that's sometimes scary as well. One of the things that I have taken up sort of arms in defense of is manager readmes. And the reason that I do it is because I think there's a way you can do them that isn't isn't toxic and isn't putting all the work on the direct report, but
Mhm.
rather is making commitments and making promises to a direct report. And there are, various thought leaders in the community that have spent some time sort of demonizing the idea of a manager readme as almost as unambiguously a bad idea. And I think certainly done poorly, like any tool, they can be.
Mhm.
But also, as a leader, I want to seek accountability. So, for instance, one of the kind of takedown pieces of this concept, it was called out that you are going to fail to live up to something that you commit to in your document, at which point you have damaged trust. And to me, that actually, I want to normalize the idea that we aren't perfect and that we can fail to live up to our highest ideals and the hopes that we have for ourselves, and create a framework by which someone could hold me accountable for what I intend to do when I fail to live up to that ideal. And if that, yes, I suppose if you don't address the problem, it could damage trust, but also how we act when things fail or when we fail is also a great opportunity to build trust with others. And
Mhm.
so it really comes down to how you use it. And
Mhm.
another
Yeah.
thing is how you plan for work in general. I don't know. Have you read Radical Focus by Christina Woodkey?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay,
But I'm
so
taking notes on all these books that I feel like I need to put out.
right. So in Radical Focus, and there's a second edition out now. I have now bought the second edition in both Audible and Kindle format. So I now own like 3 different copies of this book.
Yeah.
It is a book, essentially, it is about OKRs and about like aligning teams around delivering goals. And I have to tell you, as someone who has seen OKRs implemented poorly in a number of companies in the past, I didn't think I would ever get excited about a book about OKRs, but I can tell you enthusiastically, this is a book for you. If you're a leader, actually, if you're in anyone that's in the workplace, this is a book for you.
Hmm.
And a lot of it comes down to talking about creating space for us to uh, iterate on the ideas that are going to get us to the goals, and not create like for instance, you know how, in the typical sort of SMART goal sort of process, a lot of times when you ask a team leader to come up with a goal for the team, it'll be around the idea of releasing it, or like finishing a particular product feature, or like finishing a project in general. Some project is complete, therefore we have met our goal. But that's the wrong thing to measure, right? Because the project ostensibly you're doing because you want to impact the broader company, you want to impact the world in some way. And so there's this deeper level of like why we're doing what we're doing that you need to capture whenever you're doing goal setting. Otherwise, you don't allow yourself the opportunity to learn and adjust as you go, because you're locked in, because you've set the goal, complete this project, to potentially doing the wrong thing. And that is why I think you see a lot of companies, they do annual planning, let's say, and then by February they throw the plan out and say, never mind, we're doing this other thing, because the annual planning was so we sort of ossified it. It has ossified into like specific projects are going to happen, and not we're going to move the needle in these particular areas that we care
Hmm.
about. It's a subtle difference, but it's the one that I think we screw up. I've currently got an I've extended an offer to every person that's in leadership in my company for, it is the season of giving after all while we're recording this. So I
To
wanted
buy
to
this
buy
book.
them book. Yeah, I told them,
Yeah.
tell me what format you want it in. I'll buy it for you. This
Yeah.
is how much I believe in this book.
I have an open offer to buy anyone who is willing to commit to reading a couple of books, and I will read this one to see if it makes that list. But
Oh, I want to know your books.
Thinking Fast and Slow is one of them.
Okay.
I'm in the middle of Noise, and I imagine that it's going to be the next one. It is Danny Kahneman's follow up. He has written essentially 2 books in his very long career as a behavioral economist, and he essentially is kind of the grandfather of behavioral economics. And Thinking Fast and Slow lays out the majority of the kind of studies and arguments around understanding bias. And Noise is essentially the other kind of error, mental error that we make, which is incidental most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever that noise is maybe not necessarily a cognitive bias. It is, you can imagine a target. If the target is the accurate evaluation, then noise might scatter it around the target in a pseudo uniform way, where a bias might move it in a vector away from the target.
Got it. Yeah. So it's getting close to, in noises, like you can get close to the target, but you're actually all around it and dancing around the actual subject, which you actually need to get to. Is that
Exactly.
Is that the take?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, these are a little bit more abstract in terms of how you might apply them. They're definitely on the outside, not a specific application to, for example, setting objectives. But you could say, okay, noise has impacted the way that we measure this, right? How do we reduce noise? And this book actually has a little bit more of a practical approach than Thinking Fast and Slow had. Thinking Fast and Slow very largely focused on kind of explaining kind of the kinds of bias, but didn't really provide much of a playbook for what to do about it. Whereas Noise does provide a little bit more actionable advice. But those are my two books. I have another one that I have offered on occasion, depending on the person, which is Annie Duke's How to Decide. And she was on Developer T one time. And the book is very much so workbook oriented kind of ways of making decisions in difficult environments without, overanalyzing to an extreme extent.
Oh, that's fantastic. If you're working with someone that admits they struggle with analysis paralysis, being able to give them tools to extract themselves from that prison would be fantastic.
Exactly. And there are a lot of really good kind of principles and I guess tools, or I say tools, more like workflows to help you identify, for example, you're faced with 2 options. You should probably look at, what is the best case and the worst case and the likely case for each of those options, right?
Sure.
And then also, is there a third option that you haven't thought about?
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thing that the book provides. But
Well,
it's been a very, those 3 books have changed the way that I think about most things. It's not something that I use on occasion. It's more like a mindset shift for
sure.
me. So
The brainwaves have shifted in some way. They now
yeah,
they now move in a different pattern. But I mean,
exactly.
in the space of thought work, what is a workflow but a tool, really? I mean, we work
True.
with our brains most of the time,
Exactly.
and yeah, I would call that a tool. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
fantastic.
completely fair. Um, this has been an excellent conversation, and I guess I have to budget for these books now,
I'll
huh?
tell you what. Merry Christmas, man. I'll send you the book.
Okay. I'd love to know, I've asked you these questions before, because it's something that I ask at the end of every episode. The first question is, what do you wish more people would ask you about?
What do I wish more people would ask me about? I thought there was another word after that, but
Nope,
just
that's it.
about in general.
Yeah.
What do I wish? Gosh, these days I wish more people would ask me about how I choose my next job. I think there's a lot less intentionality out there in how, especially in a hot job market, oftentimes we, it's easy to get like wooed away to the sort of the highest pay or the best benefits or whatever.
Hmm.
And having come up with a bit of a framework by which to evaluate how I look at taking jobs these days, largely around values alignment, is kind of critical at this point, at this stage, and in our careers. Right, we are
Hmm.
not on the levels of Maslow's hierarchy where it's like we don't have food on the table. We are unlocking higher tiers of Maslow's hierarchy
Hmm.
of needs with our jobs, and so there is so much more to what we do and how we spend our time than most of us notice.
Yeah, that is. I do think a lot of people make these decisions about what the next role should be. It's a hard thing. It's a very personal decision. It's a very nuanced decision in a lot of ways for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And often, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, we try to predict what life would be like under one decision or the other. And we often have some predetermined understanding or some predetermined beliefs that we want to confirm in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing this prediction process, we try to predict things that confirm those beliefs, right? Or we try to
Mm-hmm.
predict things that make the decision less ambiguous, for example, right? Oh, that place, oh, it's awful because of X, Y, and Z. Well, it's probably not awful.
Mm-hmm.
Those couple of things you may not like about it, but you're probably convincing yourself of some extreme more likely than not. And so making those decisions often becomes even harder because when you do that and then you go back to, let's say you say, okay, well, I'm not going to switch jobs because that other place is scary, right? And
Mm-hmm.
or I saw one bad review of what it's like to work there online, and I'm just going to, that's going to be representative of the whole for me.
Right.
Then you go back to your existing job and it's, well, things haven't changed here either, right? So,
Right.
am I happy in one place? Am I happy at another place? Those are really hard things to predict.
I can hear the thinking fast and slow coming out in that description too, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it would be great if it was that simple, right?
Yeah.
If we could just reduce things with some simple heuristics down to a quick, this is bad or this is good. But oftentimes it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I would say it's almost uniformly more complicated than that. The final question, and thank you, by the way, for taking a little bit of extra time with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
The final question is, if you could provide advice, and I realize this is going to be very reductive, but quick 30 seconds worth of advice to people of all backgrounds. I guess all backgrounds as engineers, experience levels, etc. What would you tell them?
Stay curious and seek to find somewhere that stretches you and makes you uncomfortable. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable because that is the area of growth.
Mm,
And everyone I have ever known early in their career seeks to be the person who knows all the answers, and they think that's what success looks like. And what I've learned over the many years I've been doing this is that I am much, much happier when I don't know the answers and I'm learning something new surrounded by really brilliant people.
mm. Stay curious and be willing to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
Ernie, thank you so much for your time and for your insight, and again for your time for spending this morning. We're doing this on a weekend of all times. For doing this this morning with me, I appreciate it very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me again, Jonathan.
Another huge thank you to Ernie Miller for joining me on today's episode of Developer Tea. Once again, Monograph, where Ernie works as head of engineering, is currently hiring. Go and check it out at monograph.io. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Thank you again to today's sponsor, Auth0. That's AUTH0.com. You can solve your login woes for good. Head over to auth0.com. If you want to join the Developer Tea community on Discord, head over to developertea.com/Discord. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, enjoy your tea.